Okay, well today we're talking all about Frank Lloyd Wright. So is there some kind of music that we have that might kind of give us that vibe with Frank Lloyd Wright, architecture, craftsman style? Ooh, that sounds really good. Now, if anybody saw our show that we did on music and architecture, it was so popular that we're bringing it back again. I'm so excited to talk all about that again today.
And we have some of his most famous works here in Lego form.
Absolutely, we got the Guggenheim there,
Yeah.
we have some Lego sets.
I've got the Roby House,
All right,
his
that's
Prairie
gonna
style.
look- yeah.
We got the Imperial Hotel here. How beautiful is that?
That's crazy. Are there even any more Legos just for Frank Lloyd Wright? We still Falling Waters?
Falling Waters.
Oh my gosh,
This is the
look at that.
epitome of it all.
Okay, Legos might be cool with Frank Lloyd Wright, but I've got something even more Frank Lloyd Wright-ish. We'll talk about that later.
It's definitely the time period of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay.
I
I just want to be part of the band again.
And
Can
so
I
do
be part
I.
of the
So
band
Charity, can we join you guys?
Please?
Are you okay?
Please?
I think that was no. Okay.
No.
All right, we better open.
I'm going to take my ukulele and sit down.
Welcome to Between the Studs. We are Granite Ridge Builders, custom builders serving northern Indiana, northwest Ohio, and also parts of southern Michigan. We have been building custom homes for almost 2 decades, and we're really passionate about what we do. So join us today as we explore the processes, the trends, and also tips that characterize today's new home. Thanks for watching.
Welcome back. Now, it is always such an honor and privilege to be able to have additional cast members on our show here. And we have Mark and Bryn Gershmel, and we get to witness their amazing music ability, as well as Steve Boffman here. Now, Mark was a part of the band Whiteheart, and Bryn was a part of the band Rachel. So if you guys have heard of them, it is really so amazing to be able to have them here. And again, Steve Boffman, your band was Creep, right? Something like this. So you might have heard around the Fort Wayne area as well, but it's really exciting to have them talk all about music with our architecture.
That's sad to say, but Izzy was a groupie for Whiteheart, just so you know.
There's a
He
picture.
still got him in a picture of the t-shirt.
I have a question. Did you say was?
Good point. Here's what we're going to try to do today. This is going to be so much fun again. We've had so many people email us, so many people ask if we would continue on with how architecture and music are combined. And the last show, again, I think we proved it, but we're now going to take it to the next level. We're going to explain a lot more about Frank Lloyd Wright, who was probably the pioneer, and also music and how they're intertwined. So I think we have some sayings that we want to tell you all that kind of relate what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, right along with that note, Tony, Frank Lloyd Wright famously said, music is architecture and architecture is music. And our goal is, by the end of this show, you're all going to understand exactly what we mean by that, what he meant by that, and how that marriage works so well together.
He said that music and architecture, we shouldn't forget it, it belongs together. In fact, he said it's almost the same thing. We hope today in our show you kind of see what he was talking about.
Wright once said that when I see architecture that moves me, I hear music in my inner ear.
And an 18th century writer once said that music is liquid architecture and architecture is frozen music.
Really, over the last 100 years, it boils down to one thing. What does all this mean?
So that simply means, how does an architectural building at home make you feel?
And it's also, what do you see?
Yeah.
And because of that, what do you hear and feel from there?
Okay, so let's try to explain a little bit more, maybe about the architect himself, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Now, Frank Lloyd Wright is America's greatest architect.
Now, he had 4 major influences that made him the architect that we came to know. Now, starting from a very young age, his mother put Frobel blocks, and those are the little geometrical blocks that you see kids play with today. She put those in his hands at 6 months old and forced him to play with it because she knew he was going to be an architect someday. Then fast forwarding, he fell in love with nature. And you see that with a lot of his architecture where he made it blend with nature, not stick out from nature. And then he also spent a lot of time in Japan, and you can see a lot of the Japanese influence on his architect. And the last influence, you guessed it, music, right? So it was documented that Frank Lloyd Wright would listen to music as he was drafting up a new home. Not only just because he liked it and enjoyed it, but for inspiration too. The music would influence it and you could see it on the paper. And by the way, he was a pretty good pianist himself.
Yeah.
And he was the founder of the Prairie architectural style.
He really introduced us to the ranch style too. into that interior open concept that we all
In
love.
fact, we're building that all the time. We're doing verandas now. We're opening those great big 8-foot doors and 8-foot high and wide, and it just makes you feel different in our houses.
And because of his love of nature, he really blended your indoor and outdoor living. He really focused on how to open up those spaces so that way you can look outside and see those beautiful sceneries.
Now, Mike, I think you're kind of taking that to an extreme. You've got a whole kitchen outside now that you're using for everything.
Absolutely, I am a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I will do that every single house I ever build.
And all these pieces, again, come around to show us that Frank Lloyd Wright was the originator of the modern style that is very popular today. And another little thing that you may not have known, we talked before about the Lincoln Logs.
Playtime.
John Wright was Frank Lloyd Wright's son, and he was the inventor of the Lincoln Logs. And he named it after his mother's maiden name, Lincoln, not Abe Lincoln. So again, if we've got all these things that have got the Lego blocks that are Frank Lloyd Wright, this is even more Frank Lloyd Wright than those.
You learn something new every day.
So this was your way of saying we're talking about Frank Lloyd Wright, and this was his son that came up with this. That's a really stretch. You said you were going to give us something really special today.
Well, I'm going to build you something special if you give me a minute. Hold on.
So before we kind of get into some examples for you guys of some of his houses and what he's done with them and why the music was so important, I think we need a little background check. He was born June 8th, 1867, died April 19th, 1959. That means he was 96 years old. He had a career that spanned 70 years. He built 1,000 absolutely astounding houses and or projects. Wright's grandfather, his father, and his uncle were prolific, amazing preachers in the Unitarian Church, and music was their key. Frank was raised on rural Wisconsin and spent his summers working in his uncle's farm where he developed his amazing love for nature. Wright's father was a gifted musician, and Frank learned to play the piano and the violin. Now, one thing that's very important about him, Frank became a talented architect in Chicago. After the terrible 1871 fire, he went there and he could become his own engineer. He started building buildings that were interesting, different, and that's how he got to start.
Now, Frank Lloyd Wright loved Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart. His ultimate vision for life was to find harmonious balance between man, nature, and society through architecture and music.
So now that you know a little bit of background about Frank Lloyd Wright, let's do this. Let's get some specific examples of how Frank Lloyd Wright heard music in his architecture.
You know, he interestingly heard things and saw things in groups of four. His colors were that way. Sometimes his geometric shapes that were that way. That goes back to a lot of music, like, does anybody know this song? She drives me crazy. Not her. Like no one else. Maybe sometimes. Drives me crazy, and I can't help myself. Well, there you go. There's four chords, and the entire pop world has sprung from as few as four chords. Yeah. But then you've got things like the 12-bar blues, which many times are just three chords, but sometimes go into four. And since Muddy Waters was not available today, or B.B. King, we got Lonnie.
Oh, yeah.
Keep it, crowd, keep it down. Keep it down. Anyway, yet another talent of Lonnie. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. I want your autograph when you're done.
This.
Whoa! Yeah.
But Lonnie, do you really need to have like 14 harmonicas with you
I do.
for this one song?
Actually, he needs you to hand them to him.
I'm his roadie.
Oh, man. But the beauty of what he did was he saw, and there's a great engineer he did Tom Petty's albums. He did a lot of people. His name is Richard Dodd. He's an English guy. And he says there are three things that people can listen to when they're listening to a song. So he identifies the 3 most important things and makes sure in his mixes you can hear those front and foremost. Frank knew that about architecture, and he said, I need these elements, everything else sublimates.
Now, Frank Lloyd's house, the Taliesin West, there was a curtain that resembled music notes. Now, as you look at that image, you see harmony and jazz, and it's really a great image to see how architecture and music pair together really well.
Here's another example at the Taliesin compound of the use of vaulted ceilings and continuous clear-story windows. So this reminds me of quarter notes, links with melody, simplicity, and then the clarity of the lines.
Now, as fantastic as Taliesin was, there's so many other examples of Wright's architecture that we've got to get into. But one thing I want to make sure doesn't get overlooked, Wright was so meticulous and so much of a perfectionist with his artwork that he made sure that he tied in his architectural styles into the interior finishes of the house and designed a lot of the furniture as well. And when you take a little closer look at this, like the stained glass that you see in the windows or on doorways or even in the areas where he built them around the lights, like the light globes, you look at those and you can almost pick out the notes, musical notes within those. Then also when it comes to the interior woodwork, some of the railing, and even the chairs that he designed, which weren't all that comfortable. But you notice that there are lines, a lot of horizontal and vertical lines in those, and those look like sheets of music, notes of music.
So that ribbing is what
yeah,
you're
the
saying.
ribbing, correct.
I did hear that everybody was so impressed with his big backed ribbed chairs. They said it was like a room within a room. When you had 6 of those chairs around, they said the conversations could last 6 to 7 hours and nobody knew it, except their rears were not feeling very good after they were done.
Right.
I do have a coffee table that's in a Frank Lloyd Wright style, but it was like from Target, so it didn't have that.
But Sharon, you should consider yourself lucky, because what a lot of people don't know is Frank Lloyd Wright would actually design this furniture and he would put it in the homes and not tell his clients and then send them an invoice after the fact.
Right. Well, and he wanted harmony, right? He wanted the interior to match the rest of the house, and he didn't want somebody moving a shag carpet in there, right, and ruining everything that he worked so hard for. Now, we talk about these interior finishes that Frank Lloyd Wright created, and you know, a lot of these musicians, the equipment, the tools that they're using, they don't become, you know, beautiful until they pick them up, but when they're just sitting there by themselves, they've got a lot of beauty in them themselves. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to talk about that.
I love that you noticed that. Every guitar player in the world is glad that you noticed that, because it's one thing about guitars is they just grow beautiful with age, actually. But look at the finish on both of these, how different they are, and they're both beautiful in their own way. What I love about Frank Lloyd Wright is he saw the beauty in wood, he saw the beauty in stone, and each stone spoke to him a different way. He knew how to place those in the house so we would all feel good looking at it and feel good sitting with those things around us. I kind of think of his house as a great organic song where you got the wood of these instruments and maybe a grand piano and a guy with brushes on, you know, just something soft. So you feel that space around you. He understood space, I think, better than any architect I know. And when you look at these houses, you just want to go inside and feel peaceful, see people that you love across from you on the sofa, and enjoy the ambience of a room filled with light.
All right, guys, now let's get into some of the houses that Frank Lloyd Wright actually designed himself. And it's hard to start a list without starting somewhere near the Roby House. It's the diamond of the Chicago area, and it's just this big, expansive, layered house, has this beautiful brickwork on the outside, and it is so inviting, like Mark was talking about, where, you know, those layers harmonize together so well, and it's just one of those type of houses where you could see your family growing up and spending time together.
You know, the interesting part about the Roby House is it's built into a Chicago suburb, and you look at it and you don't realize that you're in the suburbs. I mean, he built it in such a way that he surrounded it with nature, and it just made it feel like it was part of it all. And then he did almost the opposite when it came to Falling Waters. because he was already out in nature. He didn't have the city around him, and he was building it into here. And you had this natural waterfall coming from underneath the home that people can go down and they can just literally take a couple steps down and they're dangling their feet in this natural waterfall through there. It's just such a peaceful area that when you're walking into it and you're walking into the rooms, it's almost just inviting you to have conversations and inviting you to just be with the people that you love, and the neutral colors that he had and the stained glass windows and the way that the sun hit these. He designed it all that way because he wanted you to become one with the house, which was one with nature.
And his ability to bring the outdoors inside of your
Yes.
house is just unmatched.
Yes.
And with falling water, like Mark mentioned, he's able to see how these rocks and stones can speak to you. You almost can visualize when he stepped foot on that property the first time, he saw that rock, the rock spoke to him, and he said, I'm gonna build this house into that rock. Not on top, but into it, and incorporate it into that house.
So Mark, what do you think on the falling waters? What kind of music do you think that speaks or hears to you?
Well, he was smart enough and intuitive enough to know that water is its own music. How many times do we go to the beach just to hear water? And how that changes us. And for me as a musician, there are so many beautiful instruments in the world. And so many wonderful people that play them, but I don't think I've ever heard an instrument more beautiful than the wind. And so if you imagine yourself at falling water, that water going in the rustle of the leaves around you, and you're sitting in that room filled with light, all that golden light coming in, man, what are we doing tomorrow?
Going to the beach.
Bus, let's go.
We've got an RV.
Ah, that's right, you do.
Yes, yes.
When you're speaking of music, of course, the Darwin Martin House in Buffalo is one that is just filled with musical references. From the long Roman bricks that would be long notes that are on the outside of the house and the inside of the house. Small details that they did, like having a purple martin house, birdhouse built onto the campus to again bring more birds into it, more nature around the house. Wright called it the opus, the well-nigh perfect composition, and a domestic symphony, true, visible, and comfortable. Skylights everywhere that actually reflect what looks like notes to be on the floor and on the ceiling. Mark, tell us a little bit more about what an opus really is.
Well, opus means that for many of the classical composers, it's your great work is what an opus is. And I think what he was feeling was when sometimes, oh gosh, I've written so many bad songs. You learn about what a good song is by writing a bad one. Heaven knows I got a lot of bad songs I've written. But when you finally hit on something and you feel like, this is it, the balance is right, the lyrics make sense, it flows out of your mouth right, the message is right, that's what he must have been feeling when he wrote this. He says, this is about as close to perfect as I can come.
Then there's also the Guggenheim Museum building in Manhattan, New York. It was built in the 1950s. Again, Frank Lloyd Wright was the architect, and it's a very unusual art museum. You have to walk in a circle. It's a spiral building in order to enjoy the art. Very unusual. I know a song like "I'm So Dizzy, My Head Is Spinning" comes to mind. Mark, you probably have a better idea on that building.
Wheels on the bus go round and round. Or meet George Jetson. That thing looks like, and I've been in it, and I'm an art lover, it looks like the spaceship that landed wrong side up. And you seriously are tilting as you go through it. It's like, maybe there, it's a cool building.
They figured out that they couldn't hang pictures like behind you because everything was round, so you couldn't hang a picture on the whole area.
Yeah, so you,
But don't you think that combines in with New York, though? I mean, New York is mass chaos.
Yeah.
So is
There
this
you go.
museum.
so right, man. That's why they pay you the big bucks.
We're now going to talk about several of the styles that Frank Lloyd Wright had an influence in creating, and they really were his invention. So the first one is going to be Prairie style.
Now, we've already told you that Frank Lloyd Wright is the greatest architect in America. And we can't talk about Frank Lloyd Wright without mentioning Prairie style. He is the father. This is the original American style of architecture, and he had his hands all over it. Kayla, why don't you tell us a little bit about what goes into Prairie style?
A few of the features you're going to see with the Prairie style would be the long cantilevered levels. You're going to see projecting eaves. You have long overhangs. You're going to see large beefy columns to the point where you call them piers. And then you have Roman brick, a lot of staccato sort of patterns with his homes. The Prairie style is where we got Prairie grids. So there's a lot of different features that you can play with this. There's probably a few more.
Yeah, I know the cantilevers. What he did was concrete was just coming in vogue. And what he did is he invented something that went really long, but he needed steel. Now, a couple things that happened. Sometimes they really didn't work like he thought. And some of the things he designed, because they had a lot of flat roofs, as you've seen, they used to call some of his home buckets, and they mean this. It might be a 3-bucket home, the Falling Waters was an 8-bucket home, but it was so unbelievable. The outdoors and the indoors with the cantilevers.
But the nice thing about the outdoor part of it is with those projecting overhangs, you didn't get wet outside, you only got wet on the inside.
And we kind of do that with our verandas now, right?
That's
So
right.
that's how we kind of tied in that. Now, also Prairie, very low slope roofs. And that's, again, goes back to that bucket.
Now that we have some great images of what makes up the Prairie style, what do you guys think of and what does that bring musically?
Oh, I have a perfect song for that.
Great.
Oh, for Prairie.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.
Would you sing it with us, guys? That's perfect. No.
We're good.
Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play.
No, wait, Izzy, what do you hear when they're singing that?
And the skies are not cloudy.
We say that a lot around it.
Now let's take a look at this modern Prairie house that Granite Ridge has built in Tullymore Run.
Well, the modern farmhouse is a popular trend here in our local area, and that was inspired as well by Frank Lloyd Wright. Just think about the scale and the proportion of these homes, the big overhangs, the use of some natural materials, and these are also simple. There's not a lot of clutter or extra ornamentation on these.
We've got some big front porches, lots of neutral colors, so white with maybe black windows, things that stand out like that. Lots of layers, but in those neutral colors. So we are doing a lot of them. We have a modern farmhouse plan that we use quite a bit of.
Now my favorite example of the house that we've done is in Leo. Our model out there is beautiful. It's a perfect example of the modern farmhouse.
I don't know about you guys. The music I'm hearing is something like Green Acres.
Green Acres is the place
Oh.
for me. Farm living is the life for me. I don't remember the rest. Far and wide. Give me that country song.
Well, yeah, I got my spittoon right here.
That's an accessory.
Did you really?
I think we need to move on from this farmhouse.
Have a towel over there or something?
The next style that we want to talk about is modern industrial. Now, what makes this one easy to talk about is literally we're sitting in it right now. So you can see we've got exposed brick behind us. We've got pipes and old style factory lights in here. But obviously this is more of a repurposed. How does this tie into our new homes?
Well, the interesting part about that is Frank Lloyd Wright did a lot of industrial office buildings during his time when he was doing the whole countryside with everything, including some offices he was doing was only having windows at the very top to get the natural light to come into the building at all times. So he did that so the employees never knew what time it was.
Oh.
So they would be continually working and working and working and not going on.
Would you write that down? We might do that.
Well, now as Fort Wayne and Allen County is going through its revitalization, we're seeing a lot more of the modern industrial going on downtown at the Landing, in the new lofts area that they're doing with some of the residential living. Restaurants is doing a lot of it. You're seeing more of those glass garage doors that are going up in a lot of the restaurants. And we're doing it more in our houses, like over in Leo, in Tullamore Run. We have a beautiful modern industrial house out there that is available to be seen each and every weekend.
I hope you really found this interesting. I know we have really had fun doing it and we've learned a lot. Mark, summarize for us what you kind of get on this feeling of architect and music and the combination.
Well, it's been an honor to be with you guys. We're big fans of the show. And I also want to throw a shout out to Sam Grassley, who is taking care of all the sound for us today. No musician ever sounded good without a sound engineer that was good. So thank you, Sam, for what you did today. Teams make the difference. And I've just always loved Frank Lloyd Wright. He's an amazing architect. Amazing gift to see the world in ways nobody else saw it before. And he saw places that we were supposed to live that would feel like something. These people over here are extraordinary at what they do. They're very, very gifted. We wish they built in Nashville. But they do the same thing with the way they lovingly craft. These aren't just houses, these are homes. And every room has a feel, and every room is supposed to be special so you and your family can walk in and live together and grow together and love together and have a great time just being with one another. So I thank them for the chance for Bryn and for me to be part of this event. And I urge you to check out their homes. You're going to feel different when you walk in the door, just like you would on a Frank Lloyd Wright's house.
Well, thank you so much for being here, guys, all of you. Haley, would you go ahead and close for us?
Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do so well, please pick up the phone and give us a call. Visit our website, or even better yet, come in. We'd love to talk to you all about your new home.
Okay, that flew by.
Normally
I do a joke about this time, but I can't do it with that going on.
And the music and architecture that goes together is going to be so exciting.
And we have some of his most famous works here.
That was my fault.
Oh.
I got boxed in and I had nowhere to go.
And Mark here was a part of the band Whitehaven.
Whiteheart.
Yep. Whiteheart. I knew that wasn't
Whitehaven,
right.
it's just across from New Haven.
Now remember, Lonnie's not chum cheese, even though he's sitting there.
Is he a little bit different?
I'll say Steve.
That's good. What do you think? Does that work for you guys?
Felt like I was at Frank Lloyd's funeral and somebody was reading. It came to mind.
Actually, it really did.